In the first part of our PowerPoints for this week, we're going to look at employee and employer rights. So I have a disclaimer for the information that we're about to go through. This is to give you an introduction or general information or overviews about the laws and issues pertaining to childcare settings. Any legal questions or requests for specific information about liability or employee rights needs to be directed to the state governing agency, human resources employees or consultants, or even lawyers. There's also online resources as well, but talking face-to-face or emailing with somebody is going to help immeasurably. There's a reason why there's a human resource field or classes that you can take, because this is dealing with employees and the multitude of issues that might come up with employees and how we provide and are responsible for our employees, because we have a duty to take care of our employees just as we have a duty to take care of our children in our care. So what we cover today is the briefest of overviews. Because there's a huge diversity in our programs, there's going to be a diversity of needs within policy. So if you're lucky enough to be from a large organization or a nationwide organization that has human resources, that has consultants, that's great for you, but you still need to know this information. You don't want to inadvertently get in trouble with employment or human resources by doing the wrong thing. So the more information you have, the better you can be as an employer. If you run a small business like a family childcare or a small preschool where it's you have a lot of resources available to you, and you need to make sure that you research them and seek them out, because you also have to comply with a multitude of requirements from different government agencies. And if it's only you, that responsibility is going to rest on you. And so you're going to need to do more research and more contacting of government agencies. So we're going to talk about legal rights that are afforded to all employees in the state of California. We're going to talk about employees' rights, and we're going to do a little overview of what your rights are as an employer. So how this PowerPoint is going to be is I'm going to link to or tell you the names of important departments to know as a small business owner or a supervisor of adults. So typically I have tried to follow MLA, so I have further resources and stuff like that. Today I am not. I am going to include the links, and I'm also going to put pictures of like what BDD looks like, or the FMLA poster, things like that, so that you get a sense of what they look like and you can go to those websites. If you have a hard time clicking on my links, you can either Google it, like EDD payroll, something like that, or you can go to my YouTube channel. And all of my videos are on YouTube, and it's just under my name, Jolie Van Scoik is my YouTube channel. So you could always look at these PowerPoints whenever you wanted to during the course, or at other times if you wanted to. So really what these PowerPoints are going to do is they are going to give you an overview and an introduction, because I can't cover it all. So just an overview and introduction, just a little taste of how to protect yourself as an employer, and then also how to offer to provide appropriate legal protections for your employees. So through compliance with various government agencies, you are going to be reducing the liability on yourself. You open yourself up to liability such as lawsuits or payments or citations when you do not follow through with the compliance told to you by a lot of different government agencies. Once you start employing people, that's when the government has a lot to say about it, because they want to make sure that these employees are being taken care of. So why should we learn about employer or employee rights? The first thing is knowing more about your rights, and then your rights as a employer now or a future employer. Is it clarifies the expectations, the responsibilities, and the duties that you have as an employer, and then also what as an employee, what's due to you. How are you going to be supported to be the best employee that you can be? It also reduces misunderstandings, because ideally, and you should be being fair and consistent with all of your staff. This includes salary. We'll talk more about federal acts that apply to salary, but mostly it's within your fair and consistent treatment. If you have policies, procedures, and contracts in place, which we'll talk about in the next PowerPoint, everyone's going to be signing them. Everybody will know what their expectations are, and then you enforce them equally for all of your employees. As an employer, it's really important that you limit your legal exposure. So if you know what your employer's rights are and what your employees' rights are, then if you're complying with that, you limit your liability. And then we're also working on like federal and state regulations. And I just touch on this very, very briefly. That's why I have the huge disclaimer in the first part, is because they are complex. They're conflicting. Sometimes they're congruent, sometimes they're not. They can be hard to understand. That's why there's an entire industry built around teaching people how to do this, and that's human resources. So if you're going at this alone, there's going to be some self-education on your part. And then unfortunately, if you don't comply with this, either because you don't know about it or you don't understand it, or worst case scenario, you're willfully non-compliant with it, there can be fines, you can be cited, you can be shut down, or there can be prison time for non-compliance. These are worst case scenarios, and like I've said, this is for willful non-compliance that borders on like the malicious and the cruel of your employees. So ideally, hopefully none of us are those people, but you are really looking at those first three. You want to limit your legal exposure, especially if you're a small business. You want to be fair and consistent with all your employees, and you need to know what your employees' rights are so that you can honor them. So you're reading page 227 to 239, but also page 393 to 395 in our textbook has some information about some of the federal acts that we'll be talking about. So if this was an issue that you wanted to do some further reading on, you can look at your textbook, but it's not a requirement for this class. The English Worker PDF is a worker rights from the Industrial Department of Labor, and this will be part of your quiz. So you're going to read this and then you're going to take a quiz. The quiz is not timed, but you're only going to have one chance to take it, so make sure you have pretty good internet. Take the time that you need, read the PDF really thoroughly, and then as you're taking the quiz, look up any answers in the PDF. So this is not a chance for me to trip you up or ask you tricky questions. Any question I ask is going to be in that PDF. And this is really for me just to ensure that you understand that employees have rights. Either right now you're a teacher and you have rights, and make sure that those rights are important and nobody should be taking away your meal times or having you work overtime if you don't want to, or not adequately reimbursing you for overtime that you are working for. So it's important that you know that employees have rights, and if you're an employer now, you need to be providing those rights. So there are some federal protections for employees, and I've kind of written them out, but it's just the idea of equal pay for similar work. And then the second one, the Civil Rights Act, was really started for like race and color, but we've added a lot of different protected classes. So sex, religion, and national origin have also been added, and those are important as well. So you can't discriminate on any employees because of those protected classes. And this is a reason why if this is your professional job capacity, you need to know how they are always changing. And then the Rehabilitation Act of 73, also you can't discriminate on anybody because of any disabilities. So I'm going to jump into a big act, which is the Family Medical Leave Act of 1992. And at the top of this PowerPoint, I've linked with some frequently asked questions about FMLA. But just looking real fast at this image, you can see that from 92 to 2012, so 20 years, the amount of Americans who can take time off to care for a family member has really increased. And when I talk about family members, this is not just to care for an infant or an adopted child. I had a very difficult twin pregnancy, and before my twins were even born, my mom had taken some FMLA in order to take time off of work and to help me because I was on bed rest. So it can be to take care of an adult child or any immediate family member who would need help. So we have a federal act and a state act, and that is to protect employee rights for any kind of family or medical disability. So many of you might have already used this following the birth of a child or any kind of medical reason that you would need to take leave from your job. So the state act, the California Family Rights Act, allows you to take 6 weeks of unpaid leave from your job to care for yourself or family members. Then there's PFL, which is paid family leave, and this is by an employer, and it's separate than the CFRA or the FMLA, and that can be up to 6 weeks of paid leave. Then there's FMLA, which is the federal program, and FMLA allows you to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for family or medical reasons. This typically applies to employers that have more than 50 employees, and then there are additional requirements for how long the employee has been there or how many hours that they've worked. I've included a picture of what the poster looks like, and many of you have seen this in break rooms because it's important that we post information about what our employees are due and what their rights are. So this is California State Paid Family Leave, also referred to as PFL. And so you can submit a claim to EDD, which is the Employment Development Department, for their insurance benefits, which would be 6 weeks of paid leave. And you might already be aware of this as an employee. It's where you submit your paperwork for disability. But it's very helpful as well as an employer with payment, and that's also where you would turn in your paperwork, or a doctor would as well. So it's a very good website, and I'll talk about it on the following slide. Right now, within our nation, we're kind of involved in a national discourse or dialogue about the idea of a minimum wage or a living wage. And California is quite a progressive state. And so our minimum wage is in the process of changing. So it's definitely in a state of flux. Up until 2022, the minimum wage is going to be increasing. And this definitely has to do with the idea of type of employees or how many employees you employ. So if you have 26 or more, it's going to change. And then it's delayed for employers that have 25 or less. On top of this, the minimum wage changes by area, city, and county. So what's going on in San Diego City is going to be different than parts of our North County area, which might have different requirements. So it's really important that you visit the California Department of Industrial Relations as we're engaged in this process of change, so up until 2022, so that you understand what you need to be paying your employees on a yearly basis, depending on how many employees you have. As our minimum wage increases, there's new requirements for employers with how you submit your tax returns and wage reports and payroll taxes. So EDD, like I said, is a great online resource. They have e-file, e-pay. You're really going to need to know this, especially starting January 1st. All employers need to be subject to this mandate. So if you are not, then you're going to need to contact EDD and get the information on how you set up your e-file program. So before we were talking about federal laws within the idea of kind of like protected classes and ways that you can get time off. And now we're going to talk about wage laws. So some of those are the Fair Labor Standards, which is the first time we ever set a minimum wage back in '38. And then the idea of equal pay, and then also as an employee what your record keeping requirements are. Then there's the federal wage garnishment law, which is really wonky, but it goes into the idea of when wages can be garnished. You will know when you need to use this. It's when somebody's coming to you and for a variety of reasons, their wages need to be garnished. It's not a super common one that you'll need to know, but if you ever have an employee who is subject to this, then you're going to need to know more about it. Then we have the Social Security Act, very, very common. Everybody uses this. So there's an employer contribution in addition to what, as an employee, we already have deducted for retirement and disability. And then there's the federal income tax. So you are collecting your employees' income tax and you're putting it in some kind of federal bank or dispensary. This is a big one because it is actually criminal not to comply. There are fines, you can be cited, or you can even go to jail for not collecting employees' income tax and putting it in the federal bank. So California state paid and accrued time off. So you do not have to provide paid or unpaid vacation time unless it's part of your employee contract or employee handbook. So if you're in your job contract or an employee handbook, if you have one, if you say you're provided a week of paid vacation time, you have to provide that unless your employees are willing to change their contract or it comes up as needing to be done and you negotiate that with them. Once you do have vacation time, it's a wage. It's earned. You can't take it away. It's not forfeited. Even upon termination, so you have to pay it out at termination. And I got all of this from the Department of Industrial Relations, which has a great frequently asked questions page about meal times, overtime. It's just generally a good resource for knowing if you're doing the right things by your employees. And then under California law, you do have to provide 3 days or 24 hours of paid sick leave at a minimum wage, which for the state of California, or whichever is applicable in the county or city that you are in currently or you are providing employment for. So these are required postings at a workplace, and this comes from the Department of Industrial Relations again for California, which I've linked to at the bottom. They have a wonderful page, and that's what that link is, that tells all of the things that need to be required to be posted within a workplace. They also, within that page, you're going to be looking at the general requirements. Since you're probably not a farmer or an underwater welder, you're not going to have to look at those specific posters, but these are the state and federal posters that must be displayed. And if you are working right now, which I think almost all of you are, in your break room, your bathroom, any kind of open communal space, that's where they're displayed. So it's posting the information about the minimum wage, and like we talked about, it's in flux up to 2022, and it's also specific to your county or city. And then the maximum hours that a person can work, and then overtime if they were to go over those hours. The Equal Employment Opportunity Regulations, which is often called EEO, and that's who employees go to if they have issues with their employment. They will help resolve those. There's age discrimination laws. You also need to have your fire and evacuation plans for the center and for the classrooms. You need to have your safety protections. And then on top of this, I usually post like back safety by the diaper changing table, or we'll talk about safety kind of throughout the year with staff trainings and meetings. You have a required posting, but it's best practice to use safety protections for your employees and talk about it throughout the year. And then like health protections, those will be in a common space, but I also put, since bleach is considered a hazardous material, I'll put the requirements about storing, mixing bleach, labeling it, and putting it in the classrooms. I put that near the bleach so that it's easy for employees to see it, to understand it, and to comply with it. And then OSHA, which is Occupational Safety and Health Administration, them and EEO, those are kind of the big dogs within our federal agencies, and those are the ones that are often going to levy fines against people for non-compliance. So we've been talking a lot about employee rights, and I actually think that's probably the most important thing. We need to be doing our duties and responsibilities to our employees every day so that they can carry out the really important job, which is taking care of children every day in classrooms or within FCC homes. I think that's really important work, and the more that we support and we honor the teachers' work, the better quality care we will provide. But as a supervisor, as an employer, you're going to have rights, but they are really about creating a legal standing for yourself. And that really comes down to making sure that you have written policies, procedures, and contracts on file for all employees, and you enforce them and you sign them equally. So for example, if you fire an employee for violating, let's say, a written policy on disciplining children, she could sue for wrongful termination if it wasn't signed, or she indicates that so if she didn't sign it, because signing it indicates that she understood and she agreed to it. Or if she signed it, she has proof that the policies were not enforced or were only enforced for some employees. So your right is to create a contract for employment and with employees stating your expectations. So you're coming up with what the employees are doing. That's your right, is to decide what the essential functions are of the job and to require that for your employees. Your right is also to create a contract for families that stipulate how and when care is performed and how much you're going to be reimbursed for that service. Once again, it kind of goes back to the idea of lessening liability, and the more clear you are with your expectations for your employees and your families about services that they get, how much they're going to get paid, or how much they pay you, that is going to lessen your legal liability, which is a very important thing. You have varied, diverse responsibilities when it comes to your employees, and it's really important that you honor those responsibilities to keep your employees reimbursed for the work that they do and also safe while they're doing that work. It's also a process of learning about the professional standards that are required for your job, and those are requirements from agencies, and then also enlisting professionals that are going to help you to protect yourself while also being responsible for your staff and employees.